Hello, I think we are now live, but I've no idea how to check that. If you could give me a comment, that would be great. Let me just check. See if anybody is joining us. There are apparently 4 people watching. Please say hello and let me know if you can hear me all right, please. There are 21 people watching. Nobody said hello yet. Is it coming through clearly? Hello, Bethany. Thank you for letting me know that you can hear me. So this is the first time I've done a live video, so if I'm slightly uncomfortable or awkward, that obviously explains why. I've got my PC open just to make sure everything comes through, and I also wrote myself some notes of everything that I'm going to go through. Hello, Kimberly, and Bethany said hello twice. Leanne's joined. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. If you happen to see the door behind me open and something jump up, that'll be my lovely cat Loki, who doesn't know when to stay out, and she refused to go out earlier, which was very considerate of her. Let's see, we are up to 50, good grief, 52 people watching. That's more than I was expecting. Hello, Elizabeth. Hi, my wonderful friend Bev. Right, so now that we've got a few people watching, we will make a start. So last week, the school that I teach part-time at had an OFSTED inspection under the new framework. It was the same procedure before it happened, in that it was the phone call the day before, at which point the process of getting everything out, everything ready begins. It was a 2-day inspection with 2 inspectors who, I have to confess, were really, really nice. They were very supportive, and the whole atmosphere seemed very much different to last time. It was a very different process, which I'm just going to go through for however long it takes. If anybody has any burning questions they want to ask, feel free, but I can't promise to answer them, especially if it's about what a deep dive in history looks like, as that wasn't done, and I don't coordinate history at that school. So, rough outline of the day. They arrived on the morning. Their timetable was agreed the day before, and my gosh, it was busy. It was timetabled exactly what was happening when, which was really quite useful, but quite difficult to manage in a smaller school. I imagine it's far easier for a larger school, of course. On day 1, there were deep dives into several subjects. School had some say over which subjects were looked into, which was very, very useful, as if they'd have chosen at random, there would have been no evidence for certain subjects. I can't really tell you which ones. Oh no, I can, I think. Reading, as we all know, is compulsory. That is inevitably going to be dived. They had a real emphasis on early reading as well, which was quite interesting, but I have to confess, not something I know a massive amount about. They did maths and art were the other ones, and there's one more which I think is writing. And the school put forward art because that's what our focus was at the moment. Now, overall, it was very much in line with every piece of information I'd read on the internet. So it was really, if you've read the inspection framework, the guidance, the guidelines, then yeah, it's very much to that point. and make it a real opportunity for you to shine and you to show off what your school does, the best that your school has to offer. So over the course of this video, which I'm really hoping it doesn't take a massive amount of time, I'm going to go through several aspects and my personal anecdotal reaction to them. I can't guarantee this will be the same for every school, of course, but there we go. So in terms of my class teacher role, luckily I was on a trip on one of the days, and they were absolutely adamant that the timetable remained as normal as possible. So there was no question about it ever being cancelled or anything, which is fab. Unfortunately, my job share, who is coordinator of one of the subjects that was unable to come, but that's not a problem at all, I guess, because we found a way around it. I'm pretty confident they'd have been flexible with how that worked had she been unable to change that, but that I can't comment on that for certain. Now, so on the second day, I was observed teaching history, which was, well, rather pleasant, as it might be a subject to know quite well. But in terms of being a class teacher, the things that really stood out was the fact I really need to know my children, which is not something that most teachers should worry about. As long as you know who are your pupil premium, SEND, and those more able children, and you can explain what you're doing for them, then I can't see that being much of an issue. It certainly wasn't too much for me. The classroom team, if you're lucky enough to have support assistants in the classroom with you, make sure the classroom team are fully briefed and understand exactly what is being done, the procedures, all of those usual routines, because the key message here is consistency and ensuring that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, and everybody has that clear understanding and vision for what you're trying to achieve, be that in the lesson or overall. It's also a very good idea to make sure everyone is fully aware on all of the paperwork on all of the children as much as possible. So if any of them use PECs or now and then cards or any other assistance, make sure they are available and make sure they are reinforced, which I'm sure pretty much everyone does as part of their standard practice. So I think that's everything about the overall classroom environment. If you have any questions, do throw them in the comments and I will try and answer them. I can see several people watching. We're holding at about 50, which is more than I was expecting. Now, in the history lesson that I taught, I did several things very, very consciously, and they are all things I would do in a normal lesson. I hope everybody is out of the habit of doing a wow lesson, because a wow lesson, it does not achieve anything particularly. And if it is not part of your normal practice, you are going to get found out. I taught the first lesson of my Stone Age to Iron Age topic, which, if you'd like to look at, is explained on the blog on the website. So do feel free to give that a look. Let's go to www.mrtdoeshistory.com/blog, and it will be updated as and when I teach the lessons. Just a brief overview of that lesson. The focus was on periodization, which is one of the key changes from history topics from Key Stage 1 into Key Stage 2. So I deliberately emphasized what a period of history was, and then drew direct comparisons to how it was different to what the children had encountered in Key Stage 1, where they had learned, they'd done a topic on castles, linked to trip to Skipton Castle and then tied in to the Queen, as a significant individual, and they'd done the Great Fire of London in year 1. So I created a timeline overview of the Stone Age to Iron Age, and then used the principle of duration to explore how they were similar and how they were different. The key vocabulary is that I used, I believe, is on the blog, and the actual way that I constructed the timeline is on the progress tracker. It's just copied and pasted slide from the progress tracker, which is available free on the website if you use the code that I gave away for free when the page reached 10,000 likes. Now, all of those are free. Please, by all means, do make use of them. The principle that I worked under was it was a very chronology-heavy lesson, and once we'd established what duration was, we'd established the periods of history, I then introduced them to this was the beginning of the narrative of Key Stage 2 history. So it's the earliest point at which we look, and I related it to the idea of a book, which is something that I learned from Ian Dawson, who runs Thinking History and is absolutely brilliant. So I'd thoroughly recommend his website. Once we'd done that, we started saying, so we are learning about the first chapter of our book of British history that we learn in school, and then explored just how long the duration of this chapter was in relation to all of the other ones that children learned physically. Now, normally I would do this by making a human timeline, and I would scale it myself, moving where the children were, and then the rest of the class would explore the timeline practically by walking along it. However, year 1 we're using the whole of PE, so I had to do it slightly differently. I did exactly the same principle, but I sent 2 children off using an iPad and Air Server, which is creates like a live video feed, and I spoke through the children of the fact we were walking back through history, we were heading back in time, which points in which we'd reached, and it was great for engaging them, and it really illustrated the point of duration, which was the key lesson focus. Key bits to remember is the fact, and here's the cat. Hello, Loki. Hello. The key points to remember are the fact that it was a normal lesson. I would teach that lesson to introduce pretty much every topic that I teach, and I deliberately stressed the concept of chronology, periodization, and duration. Goodbye, cat. Go on, out you go. Thank you. In the way that I normally would. Wow, the cat's definitely put me off. Hang on 2 seconds. I've got notes on my other computer. So the concepts that I really stressed was chronology and periodization, and the vocabulary, as I said, is on the website. So it was chronology, it was duration, it was a period of history was the real emphasis, and it was really important that the children used those, and they'll be reinforced throughout the topic. As the lesson was taught, the inspector and a member of the SLT who was jointly observing it both made notes, as you'd normally expect, and they spoke to a wide range of children. It was approximately, I think, about 25 minutes that they were in there, which is along the side of average. Most of the others' observation drop-ins were about 15, between 10 and 20 minutes, about 15 being the average. Rebecca, hello, I've just got your question. I will come on to that at the end. The next kind of phase was what position or how does this lesson fit within that overall sequence of learning? and how does it build into the overall school curriculum. Now, do not be afraid to say this is something that you're working on, because at the moment there is that transition period at which we can say that, and it's really important that we do say that and they do take it into account. I would strongly suggest making sure that you have in mind where this fits in. For me and my Stone Age topic, this being the first lesson, it was easier than it otherwise would have been. The periodization idea and narrative idea is revisited in every topic every lesson of the topic, and it's really, really important that children get used to that so that they can see how this narrative that we're teaching fits together. So the next lesson, which is now on the blog as well, fits in as it's the Paleolithic study, and we focus in depth on what life was like in the Paleolithic. There are examples of what I did on the blog, as I said. So in terms of the actual class teacher role, I taught a normal lesson. I deliberately stressed the concept that I was teaching, and I deliberately stressed vocabulary and really prompted the children to use it and gave them the world's simplest vocabulary map to remind them how to use it, and then team points for those that did use it. Nothing complex, nothing groundbreaking, but that's how I did it, and it did go down well. In terms of the actual beyond the class teacher into the subject leader role, it's really useful to get the questions from the other subject leaders, and it's really, really, really important that the teaching staff and the subject lead have a joint vision for the subject. What are they teaching in, and how does it fit together? Being obviously a lover of history and someone that delivers training in history, it was quite easy for me to link those together. But I'd really, really recommend that it's a really good idea, I should say, to look closely at what is being taught where and deliberately build those links in. Now, in terms of the way I build those links in, I do it in two ways. The first being conceptual links, such as continuity and change, similarity and difference, and significance. Beyond that, look for which themes come up over and over again. I tend to focus a lot on invasion because it comes up a lot. British history is invasion and conquest pretty much throughout our whole primary curriculum, but also other ones that tie into wider values. You could look at government, you could look at trade, you can look at the different religious beliefs and then compare and contrast them, just to actively build in those links and really reinforce the idea that this knowledge has a purpose and use. The subject leaders' roles, just go back to those to my quick notes. The subject leaders jointly observed lessons during the deep dive. Now, had that been me, I'd have been quite nervous about that, as I've never actually observed a lesson, and therefore it would feel a bit uncomfortable for me. But it's really important that we're honest and just say the fact of what we actually thought of it. Have those headings in mind, have those thoughts in mind of what we're aiming to achieve, what the lesson should contain, what it should do, what the outcome should be. And if it doesn't go well, it's not a problem. As long as the teacher is able to say, yes, no, that didn't go well, I do this, this, and this differently, then that's taken into account. It's not an issue, because being reflective is obviously a very important part of being a good teacher. Make sure that you look at what your subject is currently, as in to what extent is it taught, how good is it, how effective is it, and what position on the journey are you on. We very openly said we had focused on the core subjects over the past few years, and the inspectors agreed and said that was obvious. We also said exactly where we were on in terms of the approach of improving the wider curriculum, and they agreed completely. As long as the two marry up, as long as things tie together, then that's great. That's exactly what you're wanting. Overall, make sure the leader, teachers and children are saying the same things about lessons. Don't rabbit on about it. Don't get them to just be able to quote things, but just make sure the purpose is clear, the outcome is clear, and where it's going is clear, because it just ties into what the framework says that we're looking for. Now, overall, key messages after this particular inspection. It was really different to any that I've been, to the previous one that I've been part of. In a good way, to be brutally honest, and not just because I was on a trip for one of the days. Yes, it is absolutely more rigorous, especially on the middle leaders, on the subject leads. But you have to look at it and think to yourself, this is a professional dialogue between two professionals. It is not the inspector's word is law. You are absolutely expected to put your case forward. I was in on a sport and personal development meeting as I coordinate PE at school, and the inspector was really interested in what we were doing and why we were doing it and how it related into that overall approach. Now, be honest, because they're well-trained and very experienced individuals who can look at things and go, they'll spot if things aren't how you're explaining them to be. They'll make it obvious that they know, and if you're covering things up, they'll spot it. Now, how I'd approach the next inspection. Number one, have the curriculum mapped for every subject, not just what's being taught where, but really emphasize the point of subject discipline progression. It's not saying you can't teach topic themes at all. They're very often have been really adamant about the fact that you can teach in any way that suits your curriculum, but what has to stand out is subject discipline progression. There is no such subject as topic. I'd really suggest that if you have topic written on the board, you put in brackets which subject or subject it is, so the children know the difference, as this will make your life easier as they'll be able to talk about those subjects. More long term, build up a bank of examples of what your version of expected standards looks like for each year group, because if you don't have that bank of information of what expected standards look like, how can you ensure consistency? It will also give you good examples of what it should look like throughout year groups when you have staff new to school or staff move between year groups. And last but absolutely not least, make sure your curriculum highlights your children's context. If your children come in with a lot of experience, a lot of wider knowledge, are you actively trying to tie that in? Are you allowing them to show what they've learned, how they know it? And conversely, if the children come in with really much lower cultural capital, which is obviously a key phrase, then how are you ensuring that they gain that through what you're teaching them? Is it through experience? Is it through experiences? Is it through enhancing those? And just have in mind that vision of what you're aiming to do. Your locality should shine. If I were to look at your curriculum, and I'm not an inspector and have no interest in being an inspector, would it be really clear where in the country you were? Would it show what makes your area special? Would it be obvious? As ideally, it should be reasonably easy to work it out, either looking at the long-term plan or by looking at the wider context, the more detailed plan, sorry. And make sure that it builds on their understanding of the world, as we live in tumultuous times, to put it politely, and children need to know about the wider world, not just their own smaller version of the Little England principle. So that's everything I'd got scrolled down on my notes. I think we had a couple of questions. I'll just go through the comments. Bethany said hello. Bev says, hi Stuart, I have a meeting with OFSTED on 12th December, so good to have your insight. Thanks very much. It was, I wouldn't say it was a positive experience, but it was definitely fairer and more accurate representation of the school as we got the chance to show off what we were about. Rebecca, which are the best timelines to use? Honestly, there's so many out there. I always prefer to make my own, as you can tailor them exactly to your own school. You can put in exactly what you want, and it's not just a generic off-the-shelf product, because there are a lot of those, and I can't say I've used them. Let's have a look. Rebecca's in year 3 and 4. The ones we have in school are the wonderful caretaker actually painted them on the wall. So it is literally blocks of colour with labels on of what they show, and we just make reference to them for the overarching narrative that we're teaching. Sharon, hi Sharon. Hi, teaching Stone Age to year 3 as well this year. It's a really tricky topic, as it's one of the most interpretation heavy topics, yet it's taught to the youngest children, which I find quite interesting. Hopefully you've seen the blog, as that's going to be my approach of how I teach it. I will be teaching it as an overview, so not really going into depth on anything, as we do a very large depth study on the Romans in Spring 1. Carmen, hello. Deep dives are so brilliant. I wonder if you'd say that if you were a subject coordinator who just have one. But I have to confess, I think if people know what they're doing with them, they are a good way to get across where your school is and where you're going. Wendy, deep dives work well when it is seen as professional dialogue between professionals. Yes, absolutely agree. I think I may have nicked that phrase from you when I was speaking before, but yeah, I completely agree. Lally U, that's a great name. Thank you so much for doing this. Got a mock deep dive into history on Tuesday, feeling very nervous. Have a look at what your curriculum looks like. Have a look at what's already available, and make sure you know exactly where you are with your subject. What's your next steps to make sure you know that. Wendy says, building on EYFS2. Yes, very true. Did I forget to say that? Apologies. The joy of a live video. Yes, you should definitely make sure you can show how your curriculum is building on EYFS2. Hopefully will. Haley says, hopefully will be by the end of the day tomorrow. Not entirely sure what that means. Thoughts on union guidance for teachers, not going into subject meetings alone. Hi, Diane. That's really interesting. I read that and I mean, conflicted, really conflicted, as I don't know. I really don't know how I feel about it. Can I understand where they're coming from? Yes, I absolutely can. I guess the way what it comes down to is the terms and conditions of the contract, in that you're not meant to be accountable for your subject progression, for your anything if you don't receive a TLR. In reality, especially in small schools, that's just not going to happen. I suppose it comes down to the ethos of your school and the atmosphere of your school. And are you given time? Hello, Loki, you're back again. Are you given time? Go on, out you go. Good girl. Are you given time to do that? Hannah, do you feel history is best taught in chronological order in Key Stage 2? My school aren't currently, and are reluctant to change. That's a really interesting one. For me, British history should absolutely be taught in chronological order, if possible. Obviously, with mixed age classes, especially smaller rural schools, that's not always possible. But if you teach British history as a narrative, it's far easier to start at the beginning, which is why we tend to do that. Hi, Glenn. Nice to have you on. Nice to have you here. Replying to Wendy. You can choose not to teach in chronological order, but it does make life harder. Yes, especially. Haley, you're meeting with me tomorrow to look at our history curriculum. Yes, I am. I'm in the lovely Lincolnshire tomorrow, doing a day of curriculum development and review, and we'll be looking at a few of these details, and then I'm in Lee towards Manchester Way on Tuesday, delivering some training on unpicking the curriculum and really looking to make the most of it. I hope you found this video relatively useful. It's, as I said at the start, it's my personal thoughts. It's very anecdotal, but it is exactly what happened whilst the inspectors were in. Another question. Hello, Noel, did I pronounce that right? Apologies if I didn't. How much time should history leads get for their subjects? It depends entirely on your school. It depends on how big the school is. To a large extent at the moment, the financial position the school is in, because if your school is struggling and is not doing very well on the new fairer funding formula in inverted commas, you may not get any. If you need to develop your curriculum, if you have got things you want to do, then I would suggest asking for time, as you should be able to get some, either staff meeting time where people work on their subjects, or time out of class, but it does very much depend on that. As I said before, I hope you found the video useful. Feel free to keep commenting, and I will attempt to reply to as many as I can. Thank you so much for the continued support of the page. It really does mean a lot, and feel free to get in touch if it would be of help. Have a great week ahead. Bye.